All right, diving in. We're tackling courage today, willpower, fearlessness. What is it that makes some people just, bolder than others? We got a ton of neuroscience research here, and honestly, it's a lot more complicated than just saying someone's brave or timid.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think what gets really interesting is how much of our biology, like our genes and our experiences, even our circumstances, they all play a role. Like they kind of intertwine to shape how much courage we have.
It's like a recipe, not just like nerves of steel or you won this brave gene lottery. The research actually breaks it down into four main things: biological stuff, genetics, how we're raised, and then this really cool part about resources and basic needs.
Fascinating stuff. Should we start with the biology stuff? We've got to talk about this thing called the amygdala. It's this part of the brain, kind of like our internal alarm bells, always looking out for threats. And for some people, it's naturally more sensitive than for others.
So like if one person jumps at a spider and another person doesn't even flinch, could it be that their amygdala is just like wired differently?
That's exactly it. Researchers have actually found that people whose amygdala isn't as reactive, their brains don't light up as much in the areas that process fear. Yeah. When they're shown something scary. It's like their brains are just by default calmer when danger's around.
Okay, so that's like the nature side of things. But what about our thinking brain, the prefrontal cortex? I feel like that's got to be involved too, right?
Big time. The prefrontal cortex, it can kind of step in and be like, whoa, hold on, amygdala. It overrides those fear impulses. Think of a firefighter running into a burning building. They aren't fearless. They're still feeling the fear, but their prefrontal cortex is letting them act anyway.
So courage isn't about not feeling fear. It's about doing what needs to be done even though you are afraid. That's pretty empowering when you think about it.
I know, right? And then on top of that, you've got hormones like testosterone, which is linked to being bold, taking risks, and dopamine, which, it's not just about pleasure, but it helps us figure out if a risk is worth it, the reward versus the danger. Like, are you going to be the skydiving type or more of a let's stay in and watch a movie kind of person?
Oh, definitely team movie night over here. But what about genetics? How much of this tendency towards boldness or not is actually something we inherit?
Well, temperament. That's a big one. Whether we're more easygoing or cautious, kind of by nature, that's largely inherited. And there's this really cool research happening on what they call risk-taking genes, especially the ones that mess with dopamine.
So some people might be genetically more likely to enjoy things like, I don't know, gambling or extreme sports, even if they come with risks.
You got it. And while those can definitely have some downsides, that same tendency, if you put it in a different setting, it could be what makes someone a really courageous leader or a super innovative entrepreneur. It's wild how these genetic things we inherit, they can show up so differently depending on the context,
Yeah, it's like the same ingredient can make a totally different dish, right? Depending on what else you throw in the pot. But it's not all about those ingredients we're born with. How we're raised, our environment, that's got to play a huge role in courage too, right?
Oh, gigantic. It's huge.
Right.
Imagine two kids. One grows up in a family where they're encouraged to, like, try new things, explore, even mess up, knowing their parents will love them no matter what.
Yeah.
That kid's going to be way more likely to face challenges with this attitude of like, oh, I got this.
Makes sense. And then you've got the kid who's raised in a home that's, I don't know, more critical or really restrictive. I'd imagine they'd be way more hesitant to try stuff, scared of messing up.
Exactly. Early on, those early experiences, they really shape how we see the world, how we handle things when we're not sure what's going to happen. And then you've got culture on top of that. Some cultures are all about celebrating warriors, risk takers. It's like built into their values, while others are more about being cautious, fitting in, not rocking the boat.
I was reading about a study and it said that kids from cultures where like collectivism is really important, they tend to be more cautious because it's all about keeping the group in harmony, right? Avoiding risks that would only affect you. It really makes you realize how much those societal norms get inside us and mess with how we act.
Absolutely. Our environment shapes us in so many ways, conscious and unconscious. But there's this other layer to all this that I find really fascinating. It's about resources, like how having your basic needs met or not met that actually influences how courageous you can be.
This is the part that always gets me. Like, how does whether or not you've got enough food or a safe place to live, how does that mess with how brave you are?
Just think about it. When you're barely scraping by, just trying to survive, taking a risk can feel like, I don't know, like a luxury you can't afford. The research shows that people who are living in poverty, they're more likely to make decisions about money that avoid risk, even if there's a chance they could make a lot more, you know?
Yeah, I get it. If you're always worried about where your next meal is coming from, you're probably not going to be like, sure, let's start that business or jump on some risky opportunity. You're in survival mode, not growth mode, right?
Right, exactly. Your focus is on keeping things stable, not shaking things up. But on the flip side, when those basic needs are met, like having a steady paycheck, a safe place to call home, healthcare, that kind of stuff, it clears up space in your mind. Space to focus on growing, on taking chances that might lead to something amazing.
So not having that basic security, it can actually kind of put a ceiling on how courageous we can be. That's a really interesting thought.
It is. It is. And this is where things like education, having opportunities, they come into play. The more you know, the more skills you have, the more confident you're going to feel when you face a challenge. Like if you know self-defense, you're probably less afraid to walk home alone at night. It's not just about like willpower. It's about feeling capable, prepared.
I hadn't thought about it like that, but you're totally right. Knowing what you're doing takes away some of that fear for sure. And then there's the whole social support thing too. Having people you love who've got your back, that can make taking a risk feel less scary, right? It's like having a safety net if you fall.
It's huge. Think about it. That person starting their own business, the one with a risky idea, they've got a way better chance if their family and friends are there for them. Not just emotionally, but maybe even helping out financially if things get rough. It's like having your own personal cheerleading squad to get you through the tough parts, you know?
So we've got this whole crazy web of things influencing our courage, from our brain chemistry to what's happening in society around us. There's no simple answer, like you're a brave person or you're timid. It's way more fluid than that. We're all on a spectrum, and that spectrum can move depending on all the stuff we've been talking about.
100%. And the coolest part is our brains are so adaptable. Like we're built to learn, to grow, to change. So someone who's always been cautious, they can actually learn to be more courageous, and the other way around too.
Wait, so you're saying someone who's like terrified of public speaking, they could actually train themselves to be a confident speaker? How is that even possible?
Remember how we were talking about the brain rewiring itself based on what we do?
Yeah.
It's kind of like building a muscle, you know? The more we do stuff that pushes us outside our comfort zone, face those fears, the stronger those pathways in the brain that are all about courage they become. It's like a feedback loop, a good one.
So it's not about trying to kill the fear altogether. It's about learning how to work with it, to do what you need to do, even though it's there. But how do you actually DO that? Like train your courage muscles, so to speak? What are some practical steps people can take?
Well, the first thing has got to be to understand your fear. Like, what are you really afraid of? Where did that fear come from? Is it a real danger right now? Or is it more like something you learned to be afraid of way back when, you know, as a kid that maybe isn't even relevant anymore?
I see what you mean. Like if you had a bad experience with a dog when you were little, you might still be scared of dogs as an adult, even if logically you know that not all dogs are dangerous. But that early experience, it kind of stuck with you, you know?
Exactly. Our past experiences shape our present fears in ways we don't always realize. And once you understand where that fear is coming from, then you can start to, like, poke at it, challenge it. This is where taking baby steps comes in. You don't have to go from 0 to 60 overnight, you know? Start with something that just feels a little bit outside your comfort zone, and then gradually do a little more as you feel ready.
So instead of trying to become some amazing public speaker right away, you might start by just speaking up more in meetings, sharing your ideas, getting comfortable with your voice being heard.
That's the idea. Or if you're scared of heights, maybe you start by standing on a chair, then a ladder, then maybe a small hill, you know. It's about exposing yourself to that fear, but in a controlled way, so you can prove to yourself that you can handle it. And as you succeed, you build up that confidence to try even bigger things.
I like that analogy. Like you're slowly, gently kind of nudging your comfort zone further out. And it's not something you have to do alone, right? We can get help from others while we're doing this, lean on people for support.
100%. Don't be afraid to reach out to friends, family, therapists, anyone you trust. Having people to cheer you on, to help you through the rough patches, it makes such a huge difference. Remember, courage can be contagious. You see someone else being brave, it can make you braver too.
You know, it's funny. I think a lot of times what stops us from being brave isn't even the fear itself. It's that we're so scared of not doing it perfectly. Like, we got to get it right on the first try, or what's the point?
Oh, tell me about it. That
Yeah.
perfectionism thing, it's a total courage killer.
Yeah.
It keeps us stuck, right?
Uh-huh.
Afraid to try anything new because what if we mess up? But The thing is, mistakes. They're going to happen. It's part of how we learn and grow.
So how do we get out of that headspace, the I have to do it perfectly trap? How do we get to a place where it's more like, I'm going to try my best and that's good enough?
One thing that can help is, instead of focusing on the end result, focus on what you're doing. The process. Like, don't get hung up on whether or not you'll achieve some specific thing. Concentrate on the steps you're taking, the effort you're putting in. Celebrate those little wins along the way, even if they seem small.
Makes sense. So instead of worrying about whether you'll get that promotion, you just focus on showing up every day, doing the best you can at your job, and whatever happens, happens.
Exactly. And you're always learning, always growing. Even if things don't go how you pictured, you're getting experience that'll be useful later on,
This whole conversation, it's really hammered home the point that courage isn't just about these huge heroic acts, right? It's about the everyday stuff, the small choices we make. Those little brave moments, they end up shaping our lives just as much.
Totally. It's like speaking up when something's wrong, standing up for what you believe in, setting boundaries, going after your dreams even when it feels scary. Those are all courage right there.
And I love that we talked about how courage can be, contagious. Seeing someone else be brave, it kind of gives us permission to be brave, too. It's inspiring,
Oh, for sure. We're wired to influence each other, for better or worse. When we share our stories of courage, it's like we're giving other people permission to step out of their comfort zones, too. We can lift each other up like that.
This whole deep dive has been so eye-opening. I feel like I've got a completely different understanding of what courage really is. Not just this, abstract idea, but something we can actually practice, something we can grow within ourselves.
I'm so glad to hear that. Remember, courage isn't some quality you're born with or you're not. It's something we build. Every choice we make, it's like another rep at the gym for our courage muscles.
So as we wrap things up here, what's one last thought you'd want to leave our listeners with?
How about this? Don't try to run from fear. Don't pretend it's not there. See it, understand it, and then make the choice to act anyway. Because you know what? Everything you want, it's on the other side of that fear.
That is such a good takeaway. Embrace the fear. Step into your power. Thanks again for joining us on this journey into the world of courage.
The pleasure was all mine, really.
And to everyone listening, keep those courage muscles working. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.
This is DigitView.